So hey, listen, I'm on the last day of my trip here. Just kind of messing around a little bit before I bring the boat in and head home. But really productive week out here. This is a northern smallmouth lake. Really clear water. For the most part, it's pre-spawn right now. Some of the younger males are starting to set up on beds, but for the most part, the pattern has been pre-spawn. We've done most of our damage with crankbait and jerkbait. And then, if we had to get a little slower, pick things apart a little bit, we actually went with a drop shot. I want to try to get one here and kind of throw jerkbait. We have a good amount of wind. And, what I like to do in these larger lakes, particularly in the pre-spawn, is out here is the main lake basin. Back here is basically the back of the bay. And you have the main point here working its way back to a secondary point. We have a little cove here, some pockets along the way. And, for the most part, what you have here is essentially a highway from the main lake basin where a lot of their wintering holes exist. They're going to slide their way into the point to start their feed and slowly make their way back here to the back bays and start to look to spawn. Now, they haven't quite gotten there yet, so I'm still kind of catching stragglers along the way. But I want to throw a suspending jerkbait right now, and I'll throw you a little tip here and there about how I like to throw suspending jerkbaits. This is a super high confidence bait for me. This is one that, for the most part, I don't go anywhere without it tied on. I have a rod dedicated to suspending jerkbaits. And we'll throw a couple of tips your way about how I like to throw it. Number one is it's very windy right now, which there is no better bait in the wind than a suspending jerkbait. It is by far a go-to when it comes to windy conditions. And the number one thing that you're going to notice as I start to throw this here is slack in your line is actually your friend. It's one of those things that growing up as a kid, they always say, oh, no slack in the line, no slack. There's a lot of other methods of fishing. You don't want to leave slack in the line. In this particular case, you want to basically start twitching and begin and end every single twitch with slack in your line. And what it's going to do is that gives this bait the freedom to dart and move erratically in a lot of different directions. And the idea is when you do give it a little twitch or a little pop, you'll see that I will be very erratic in how I do it. As the temperatures get warmer, I will really, really crack that thing hard and fast. Colder temperatures, you'll see me kind of tick it a little bit less. But right now we're water temperatures around 56 degrees here. So like I said, they're starting to get into the mode of start thinking about spawning, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. So you're going to see kind of a little bit of a mixture of some hard cracks and some very lighter twitch pauses. But regardless of how I go about doing it, you're going to see that each one of them is going to start and end with a good amount of slack in the line. This is one of those. This is one of those methods that casting distance really matters. There's a lot of other things that we look at and say, hey, distance doesn't matter, accuracy is more important, and I would say 90% of the time that's right. In this particular case, absolutely not. So good long cast out there. Some people will like to reel this down before they start their cadence. For me, where I just cast it, it's probably around 5 feet deep. I'm not even going to waste any time. I want to go right to, and you'll see I'm only picking up slack with the reel. I'm not moving the bait at all with the reel. It's only there just to pick up slack. So I'm giving the slack line twitches and then picking up the slack with the reel. Let's see if we can get a bite or two here. And you'll see that I'll vary the distance in my pauses. I'll vary the cadence. You'll see 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, and really just mix it up as I go. The one good thing that we do have going for us is we have the wind at my back. The wind is actually blowing into this pocket. With the wind blowing into this pocket, you can assume that it's going to start blowing bait into this pocket as well. And it blowing bait into this pocket is really going to create a lot of activity in some of these back channels. You'll also notice I throw this on a spinning rod. This was a tip that a pro actually showed me at one point. When I first started throwing jerk baits, I would throw them on bait cast reels. But as we said before, there's two things about this. Number one, not all the time am I throwing a big, heavy jerk bait. A lot of times I'll throw those little the little two hook finesse models, as you'd like to call it, which are a little bit tougher to cast on a bait cast rod. But the other thing about this is, we talked about this being one of the best baits that you could possibly throw in a windy condition. And to be quite honest with you, you're going to find that I'm going to be casting into the wind quite a bit. So, if you're talking about throwing one of these small jerk baits into the wind, you're asking for disaster. So for the most part, I throw my jerk baits pretty much on a spinning combination exclusively. Here I have a 6.6 EX6 from G Loomis. I really like this rod. It's a medium heavy rod. So what it allows me to do is it's got a good amount of backbone. The tip is it's a very soft tip, but it starts very, very high up in the rod. And it being a 6'6" rod, what it allows me to do is it allows me to jerk the bait down without my rod tip hitting the water, which is pretty important. So being able to constantly work it downwards. So definitely I prefer a little bit of a shorter rod. I've dabbled with potentially going to a glass rod. But the one thing I feel about when you're dealing with the glass rods is when you're giving this good hard snap, you're really not getting some of the better action out of your bait. The bait just doesn't respond with that glass rod because it's just too soft and you're just not getting anything behind the snaps that you're giving it. For line, this is one of the few I would say in few methods in which I would suggest a lighter fluorocarbon. Here I actually have 10-pound Seaguar on right now. I am throwing this around a lot of rock. So for the most part, I do try to I do like to throw a little bit of a heavier line. And I say 10 being heavier because for the most part, I would prefer an 8 if I can get away with it. In this setting, the 8 might be a little too light. I do need the abrasion resistance. Fishing with me throughout the day, I find myself having to retie this thing almost constantly, right? And you're constantly feeling up and down the line for like that first foot or so near the bait, because as you're throwing this thing around rocks, you're going to see that this bait is really going to bounce off a lot of rocks, and that line's going to rub quite a bit. The Seaguar Abrazex is actually one that I really like. The abrasion resistance. If you're looking for a little bit of a cheaper model, you could always go with the Bass Pro Shops XPS fluorocarbon. That's actually made by Seaguar. So, for bang for the buck, you actually are doing pretty good. We're just trying to see if we can get on a little bit of, if I can locate them here. And, the key to this here is, in the past few days, is we'll go through long stretches. Oh, there's one, I got a follower right now. We'll go through long stretches without getting a bite. And then when you do find them, you just start racking them up quickly, right? So the other day I had 30 fish. By like 10 o'clock, I only had, I think I only had like 4 or 5 by 10 o'clock. And the rest just came here. We found a school. We got that school feeding. We got them worked up a little bit. There's actually a fish right here looking at me. And our ability to stack them up pretty good was, a large in part due to the jerkbait and the crankbait, right? And I talked about before about the drop shot being a player in this as well. And don't get me wrong, I have a ton of confidence in the drop shot. It's just that if they are chewing and they are feeding, I'm always going to lean towards a crankbait first. And the idea is, with that crankbait, I can cover a lot of water. I'm making a lot of casts. I'm reeling it in. I'm constantly bringing this thing in. Constantly making progress. So if they aren't chewing, I can actually pile them up pretty quick. On a drop shot or any other bait that's worked a little slower, I'm kind of inhibiting my ability to basically put fish in the boat as fast as I can. And, that's kind of the name of the game. We had a little bit of a friendly challenge here earlier this week where we actually did, instead of a 5-fish limit, we actually did unlimited. And we were doing essentially car topper rules. There we go. We're essentially doing car topper rules. I think we got a little guy here. Doing car topper rules, and the idea is with the jerkbait, easy big fella. With the jerkbait and the crankbait, I could stack them up pretty fast and get numbers in the boat. If I had to switch to the drop shot, it was for a very specialized. I was trying to hit a specific target. With these, I'm trying to cover water, stack up fish, and get them going as fast as possible. And for the most part, that's really the name of the game in terms of tournament fishing, right? I can't even remember who it was. I remember watching an MLF tournament, and a guy was burning a spinnerbait and couldn't get the spinnerbait bite going, and was sitting there saying, hey, I'm actually going to have to slow down and fish here. This is terrible. And I think that's kind of the same thing here is if I can get that crankbait bite going, I will prefer that crankbait bite. If that crankbait bite isn't going, I'll lean on the jerkbait because I can still get a lot of casts in. I can still cover a lot of water. I'm just not going to be able to work it as fast. I'm not going to be able to make as many casts. I'm not going to be able to do it as quickly. You see, dealing with the 3 treble hooks is also has its perils as well. Right, your ability to handle fish, you need to be very careful with that because the last thing you want to do is get yourself hooked. So you really try to lean on some of the other methods if you can, and see if you could cover more water. And then if it's basically one of those things where it's, hey, there we go. If I have no other option, then I'll start thinking about, okay, now I got to think about, in this case, it was a drop shot. My co-angler was throwing a wacky Cinco. He's either foul hooked or he's actually pretty decent. Now, oh, 2-minute penalty for a landing violation. But all in all, it was a really successful week for me. For the most part, those two were probably on the smaller side of what we've been dealing with. The average fish was around 2 pounds, the biggest being 3-4. So you're not talking about monsters here. But, for the beginning of the year, I really like coming out here at the beginning of each year and getting in a couple of days. Last year we had a 50 fish day. This year I had a 30 fish day on Tuesday, and I kind of look at that and say that really gets my mindset right for the fishing season, to be honest with you. And it's kind of weird that it's kind of a shame that that's kind of happening at the end of May, but obviously life has its priorities. But at the same point in time, in terms of boating that many fish and handling that many fish and getting locked onto a pattern and getting everything in your boat right. A lot has to happen for that everything to go right. And what happens is particularly with smallmouth, is if you do it right, you will get rewarded. And it's kind of one of those things where, people talk about the difference between largemouth and smallmouth. And for me, the biggest difference is For largemouth, there are things that will work pretty much year-round. Are there some things that are better than others? Absolutely. But for the most part, you could go around and flip docks nearly year-round and actually do okay. It's kind of one of those things where, people like to just go down the bank and bang the bank and, and actually produce pretty well on largemouth. Smallmouth, I think it's a completely different game because right now in this lake is absolutely enormous. And I will say that about right now, probably around 90 to 95% of this lake is not producing anything. These fish are concentrated in small areas. So the idea is if you can track down some bait and you can find a school of fish and you can get them fired up into biting and you're throwing the right baits at the right time, you are just rewarded endlessly. But, as some of the boats that we were dealing with yesterday, one boat actually only landed, one fish yesterday. And I felt like we were really grinding it out yesterday. I was able to boat 17 keepers yesterday, and I felt like that was a grind for me. So to come out here and catch one fish is, I look at that and say, yeah, like that's how smallmouth are. And in particular, it was kind of funny that for the most part, what got me 50 fish the day before, I came out here, went to the exact same spot through the exact same baits, and there was nothing there. Just there was no life shown at all. There was no bait around. There were no perch. There was nothing going on around there, and it's kind of one of those things that less than 24 hours, and this place that was just absolutely going berserk all of a sudden is completely shut down and kind of leave me back to square one to kind of figure them out again, right? But the idea was also the same as, we understand that they started in their wintering holes, they're making their way to the back bays to spawn, so what ends up happening is somewhere along that way you find that highway that they're on. And once you find it, once again, you're going to get pretty greatly rewarded. In terms of size here on this lake, this lake is very well known for, 2.5 pound smallmouth till your fingers bleed if you do it right. It's not one of those that really produces large, trophy fish for the most part. You do get one here or there, but I've been coming up here a number of years, and I think my biggest smallmouth up here is about 4.5 pounds, which, for the most part is really not the trophy smallmouth that you're looking for. But once again, I do like, I was coming up here in the September, Labor Day area, even a little bit later, and, was going out catching 30 to 50 fish in a day, and I really felt like, I really wanted to move that up in the year and say, hey, let me get used to handling fish. Let me get into the swing of things. Let me get some confidence going. Let me get a lot of the things going that really paved the way for the rest of the year. And last year, that really worked out for me. I came up here, boated 50 fish, and it really set me up for a lot of my work that I did last year was grinding it out. We went to Candlewood Lake for a couple of days, and for the most part, they were not ideal fishing days. And I think that being able to say, hey, like I'm not in any rush to get a ton of fish. I need 5 bites, and fish for 5 bites. It's a mindset that I think you need to prepare yourself for, and being able to come up here and kind of that hunger that's been building up throughout the entire winter to kind of get your fill. That it really sets the stage for the rest of the year and lets you be a little more patient and do the right things and make the right decisions. But hey, listen, thanks for watching. It's been a great week for me. I was happy to share a lot of the stuff that we're doing here. In terms of just the Bear Hill baits, every fish that pretty much we caught up here was caught off of a Bear Hill baits bait. We made some modifications, some tweaks along the way, but it was kind of one of those things that it really proves that these baits are doing what they're intended to do. And the funny thing is that I'm not using them because I make them. I make them because I use them. All of the baits that we used here this week were baits that were modeled after baits that we used here last year. So it's really not that much of a shocker for us to come out here and do what we did this week. So for the most part, we were doing or using the exact same baits that we were using last year, just without the brand names on them, without the price tags on them. and just there are some little minor modifications that I make to them that I think that overall improve them. But yeah, thanks for watching. It's been a fun time. If you have any questions, comments, go ahead and post below. Thanks, guys.